Well, by the end of this, oh.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 6th installment of our latest speaker series here with PTGA. I appreciate you joining today, and we'll be spending the next hour with Gina Greer and Lisa Kelley from IATO. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment. To acknowledge any of you out there who might be feeling a little low right now. I can tell you that you're not alone. We've been hearing from a lot of you. It's that time of year when we're all supposed to be heading south together. And in light of the pandemic this year, it's just not possible. I think we're all suffering losses to some extent, certainly financial losses, maybe even a loss of identity, not being able to do what we do. But one thing we haven't lost is our sense of camaraderie. So I'm here to tell you that you're not alone. If you're feeling a little low, a little depressed, confused, or worried about the future, you're not alone. So I'm going to stray from the formula here for just a moment. I'm going to present a challenge to you. My challenge is to pick up the phone this week and to call a colleague. Say hi, catch up, ask them how they're feeling, and share how you're feeling with them. It's a low risk, high reward decision to pick up the phone, and I hope that you'll accept the challenge. So back to our regular programming. How this is going to work today, we're going to have about an hour to talk with the ladies. I have some questions that are prepared. There's some things that IATO wants you to know as a guide out in the field, but we're also here for you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function over there. And we have Lauren Farmer in the background, and she'll be forwarding those messages over to me, and we can work those into the talks today. And feel free to do that in real time. You don't have to wait to the end. If we're talking about something in particular and you're interested in knowing a little bit more, throw your question out there and we'll see if we can get it up into the queue. So ladies, thank you so much for being here today. We should start with some introductions, I think. Gina Greer, you're the Executive Director of IATO. Perhaps you can tell us a little more, a little more about yourself and what you do.
Sure, and thank you, Colby. It's a pleasure to be here today, and we really appreciate the opportunity to speak with your audience. A little bit about me. I'm going to guess that out of all the guests that you've had to date on your speaker series, I'm probably one that has the least amount of polar experience. My experience in the regions really relate more to the fact that I've been a guest in expedition travel starting in 2010. That was my first trip where I went up to Svalbard. So I'm coming at things from a completely different view. But for me, what the regions meant, especially Antarctica, was an opportunity to get away from my day-to-day, the hectic life that I had with the job where I was doing consulting work in the financial services arena, completely different than this. But I focused a lot on operations and regulatory issues that my clients were dealing with. So getting away on a ship, getting to see a different part of the world, the natural world, and really having all of you challenge me to bend my brain a different way and to look at things differently was my release for a long time. And over time, I realized how much these areas meant to me, and I decided to make my career change. Went back to school, got a master's in marine conservation and policy, and ended up seeing a post on Instagram last December for IATO looking for a new ED, and realized that that would be a great opportunity for me to really pay it forward, especially to this industry. So that's a little bit about me. Lisa?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm guessing I know some of you out there in the audience, and it's great to be speaking to you all, although I'd rather be doing it on the dock in Ushuaia, as we normally would this time of year. My name is Lisa Kelley, and I'm the Director of Operations and Government Affairs for IATO. Like Gina, I started out as a guest on the ships, and really fell in love with being on board, and thought, wow, this would be a great industry to get into. So I really threw all my eggs into the basket and begged a company to hire me as gift shop manager. And then what turned out from what was supposed to be a 1-year hiatus from going back to school. Ended up being 16 years out on the ship, mainly as expedition leader and undersea specialist. During my time, I had the opportunity also to be station manager at Palmer Station for a winter. And it was there that I really started to become more interested in Antarctic policy and also ways to get involved in the bigger picture. So I was lucky enough through the company with which I worked to be able to already be involved with as a company representative for IATO and IAATO. But as time went on and IATO posted a job for what was then the operations manager, I jumped at the chance, not because I wanted to leave the ships necessarily, but because I wanted to do something for the bigger picture to make sure that we all could keep going down to Antarctica and enjoying it and also protecting it. So I made that shift 4 years ago, and yeah, still with IATO and still loving it. And yeah, we're really happy to have Gina also as the new executive director, although her first 8 months on the job, I'm sure not exactly what she thought it would be originally.
Well, ladies, it's great to have you here. Thanks for making the time today, and thanks for everything you do, of course, through IATO to keep the industry going. Gina, maybe we'll start with you. For the newcomers that are here, how about a quick rundown of IATO? We think maybe about its structure, how everything fits together, how it actually works.
So for those of you that don't know, IATO is a member organization. It is made up of approximately 107 members currently. It started almost 30 years ago. We're actually celebrating our 30th anniversary next year in 2021. And it started with 7 operators getting together and realizing that together as one, they have a much stronger voice and they can make more of an impact together. There's lots of different stories as to how that came together, and I'm not the best storyteller on that. But what I would say is, as someone that's joined it now, I could definitely appreciate how, as a group, the operators are able to make an impact, and how they recognize the importance of working together, as one group. Those 107 members, we've got 52 operators and 55 associates. Really form our structure. They help focus in terms of different issues, the different guidelines, reporting information, working with gateways, even communicating out to the public through our ambassadorship program, more about Antarctica to kind of really solidify our position down there. When I look at what we do, I kind of look at it as two-pronged. One from our internal audience, which is our members, and the other from an external perspective. And the internal, like I said, what I look at the secretariat, myself, Lisa, the other 6 members of the team, what we really do is help facilitate the goals and the mission of the organization, which is ultimately to promote the practice of safe and environmentally responsible private sector travel to Antarctica. That's our main focus as a membership that we're coming together and doing. So like I said before, that leads us to focus on things like the guidelines that come up, whether it's site guidelines or marine guidelines, as well as just communicating out to the public, managing information, and also sharing it to our external stakeholders. And those external stakeholders are very important for us because it includes the competent authorities. Each operator needs to get either permission or an authorization to go to Antarctica. So we help maintain those relationships with the competent authorities, who are also members of the Antarctic Treaty System, and ultimately set a lot of the guidelines and rules for Antarctica, which allows us to go down there. So maintaining those relationships is important, as well as the different governments. Governments can be the different port cities we work through, whether that's Chile, New Zealand, Argentina. So managing all of that. And then ultimately, our other stakeholder that's very important to us is the various scientific programs. And that component relates to ComNat, which deals with all and works with all the stations that are down there, as well as SCAR. And those relationships really help us as we look at the impact that we're making down there and the work that we're doing. Hopefully that's a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, that was great. That was perfect. How about a clarification? So you talk about operators and associates. Can you tell us what the difference is there?
Sure. I will oversimplify it, but I'm simplifying it for myself. And the difference between an operator and associate, really from my perspective, is an operator will go and seek either permission or authorization from one of the competent authorities and take responsibility to bring people down to Antarctica. So it's our ship operators, it's our deep field operators. We do have some organizations that work with each other and they will charter with each other. So doesn't necessarily mean you have to have your own ship, but it is ultimately you that's taking responsibility for bringing people down to Antarctica. So those are our operators. Our associates are a lot of organizations that work in connection with us to support the industry. So many ship agents are members, many travel agents are members. And then we also have some of the non-for-profits in some of the locations that we visit that are active and members as well.
Great, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, another thing that you mentioned is site guidelines. I know for the guides on the ground, site guidelines that's perhaps the easiest lens to experience IATO through. Lisa, are you able to walk us through the process a little bit about site guidelines? Like where do these come from? Why are they important? What would you like to say about site guidelines?
Sure. Well, so site guidelines, they can be created by either treaty parties or IATO. So many of the site guidelines that we associate with are the ones with, say, the ATS system in the top corner, sites, some of the top sites like Goudier Island, Half Moon Island, Plano, Port Charcot. Those site guidelines have been fully accepted by the Antarctic treaty parties. But IATO can also create site guidelines themselves, which are not necessarily adopted by the Antarctic Treaty, but we do follow those and hold them as accountable within IATO itself. So an example of this would be Elephant Point, where it does not have a site guideline yet. It's of great interest to Antarctic treaty parties because especially of the increase of visitation. So IATO has chosen to be proactive and create a site guideline because we want to make sure that that area is protected and we are able to continue to visit. So the site guidelines, as they're being created either by treaty parties or IATO, they have the restrictions and criteria that we all have to work to. So that's the number of ships per day. Are those ships category 1 or category 2? And any other kind of curfew restrictions, for instance, the 10 to 4 curfew that is often found on the site guidelines. These site guidelines are actually monitored and reviewed effectively every 5 years by the Antarctic treaty parties. So there is a review, and one of the biggest parts of that review, and also understanding if there needs to be a review that comes sooner than 5 years, is the information that we receive, or treaty parties, but a lot of it comes from IATO boots on the ground, the field staff, who are being responsive and sensitive to any changes that they might see. So a good example of this is Half Moon Island. We last had a site guideline review for the Antarctic Treaty in 2018-19, where we reviewed Half Moon Island. Now, this was not part of, it was well within 5 years, but because we had heard concerns from guides, IATO was able to feed into the process to discuss this with the treaty parties who are doing the site guideline review. And that is where some of the latest updates to that site guideline have come from. The site guideline review generally consists of several treaty parties and then other observers, ASOC, WWF, and ourselves who are invited along to feed into the process. To have a site guideline fully accepted by the Antarctic Treaty, it needs to go to the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting and be adopted. It first goes through the Committee for Environmental Protection, and then they recommend that this guideline be adopted by the treaty parties, and so it is voted on as accepted. A lot of work also comes out of some of our other stakeholders that IATO works closely with. So you had Tom Hart on a few weeks ago. We work with Oceanides and others, and their work in some of the places that we aren't able to get to all the time also feeds into that creation of site guidelines, because they're able to see changes through their science. Because really what we want to see when we're creating guidelines of any sort is data-driven facts and science behind that, supporting those documents. We continue to try to be as proactive as possible, whether it's creating specific site guidelines or creating a bigger project in consultation with the community. Gina talked about SCAR earlier, and I think some guides may be aware, but not all, that IATO has embarked with SCAR upon the Systematic Conservation Plan, and this will aim to inform us of the best way to manage not only tourism, but science and biodiversity. So really it's taking all of the interests of stakeholders. It's a big collaborative effort. And we're really pleased that IATO could be one of the organizers to initiate this process. But again, a lot of this work, it relies on feedback from the staff. So thank you all for feeding into this process, letting us know your concerns, and please keep doing it. And if you have ideas now, this is a great time in this time of pause, because we are looking at ways to strengthen as we get back into operations.
Well, there you go. Everything you wanted to know about site guidelines.
Yeah.
We actually have
They're
some follow-up
exciting to me.
questions.
Yeah.
That was perfect. That was perfect. I just picked up a couple of things in there. It's great. So we do have some questions coming in from the viewers, ladies. So maybe I'll fire a couple of these out. So this one is from Annabelle, and she asks, with the exceptional increase in tourism, does IATO see an upper limit for visitors, and how would it be set?
Is that me, Gina?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's so it's important to understand that IATO would not be able to set a limit on the numbers. That would need to be done at the Antarctic Treaty Party level. So in general, anybody can visit Antarctica as long as they have a permit or an authorization from a competent authority. There is a detailed process. You know, it's not just you just rock up to the UK and say, hey, I'd like to go to Antarctica. Here's the name of my vessel, and let's go. There's a more detailed process where you have to show an environmental impact assessment. And then through that environmental impact assessment, that's where you show you have no more than a minor or transitory impact through your activities. So we can't actually come up with the numbers, and it's really, it's doubtful that it would ever happen on the treaty floor either, because there's all sorts of considerations and laws of unintended consequences. If you set a limit, for instance, how would you split that number of people between Germany and the US, for instance? You know, how does a country get allocated a certain number of people? But what we can do on our side is to make sure that we're proactive in our approach. We do have experience. I know we're all concentrating on the growth. It will come. We're all concentrating on the growth ahead. But IATO has been through 2 periods of growth already. And so what we can do also on our side from IATO and putting pressure on the treaty parties as well is for all treaty parties to adopt Antarctic tours regulations that IATO already automatically adopts. So for instance, there are some countries that have not adopted the 100 people ashore limit at one time. Whereas IATO, that is something that is, you know, ingrained in all of us, aside from the sites that have less numbers, which are less. But so that's where we stand. It comes up from time to time, but our approach will be to be proactive and to make sure that we continue to keep ahead of the growth.
Yeah. Gina, let's switch over to you. I have a question for you here. So there's been some discussion online about IATO. It's this sort of, you know, group of cooperating but competing operators. Legally, I guess the status of IATO is it's a trade association. Everybody has come together for the benefit of the tourism industry. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Like how do the operators interact with each other? How do they get allocated, you know, different sites at different times? How does that collaboration work?
Sure. So a little bit about trade association, and I realize we have an international audience. So I think in different countries and under different economic structures, trade associations can be different, but we are a US trade association. And to your point, Colby, it is a group of people within the industry that come together with one general mission, ultimately collaborating for a purpose, right? And for our purpose, it's around, you know, having safe and environmentally responsible tourism, promoting that down into Antarctica. So how do we have that work? How does that come through? Well, I mentioned before about the 107 members. Well, those members are all very active within the association. Some of them are on different committees. Some of them are on different working groups. And it really gives them an opportunity to voice their thoughts and to get involved with what's going on. And that's something they all actively participate. We've got 9 different committees and 9 different working groups that focus on a variety of different areas, including, you know, marine. I think most of the people attending today are familiar about the field ops committee. We've got a yacht committee. We've got committees that focus on the financial structure and what we're investing in, as well as an executive committee that provides oversight. Our working groups are really doing some really interesting things, focusing on climate change these days and the impact that we're making from a climate perspective, assessing what our carbon footprint is, as well as challenging us to think differently about some of our practices. We've got an Emperor Penguin working group. We have a education and outreach working group. So there are lots of different ways that they're all coming together. For me, you know, coming in as a newbie 8 months ago, I heard about this. I heard about it being, you know, cooperating but competing companies and trying to figure out how that really comes together. And where I was able to see the power of it and, you know, the full thing in action was in relation to COVID-19 and how the group of operators came together and tried to focus and figure out ways to deal with what was being presented to us through the pandemic. And it was amazing for me to see, and I've actually said this to the members several times in different forums, whether it's our town halls or our updates that we share with them, because what I've found is that the members, when they're working together, they're focused on the end goal. They realize that each one of them has an impact on what occurs. And if something happens to one of the operators, it impacts the entire industry. So there really is a desire to help everyone be successful and for us to do things safely so that we can continue bringing people to this remarkable place. And I found that that's one of the things that really drives them, that realization that, you're only as strong as the weakest link. And so we all need to come together. One of the members, I was actually talking to him about it because I knew his organization had made a decision about their season and he was still actively involved with what was going on. And, I questioned him about it a little bit. And what he shared with me at the time is that it's really important that we're all involved because of that long-term impact. So that's how we see it coming together. Now, for IATO and the association, we have tools, and I think you kind of talked to we're hitting upon it before, that help manage things, whether it's the site visits or other things, big one being Ship Scheduler. And I would actually defer to Lisa to talk about Ship Scheduler a little bit, but I think people might have seen, I think we haven't been shy to share on Instagram or Facebook what Derby Day's like and everybody going in and plugging in on their sites. But that is one of the main ways. And Lisa, maybe, to Colby's question about managing things like that, maybe you'd be best to talk about that a little bit more.
Would you like me to, Colby?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, so the ship scheduler in the old days, we, how the first wave of communication, well, there wasn't too much communication needed when there were 1, 2, 3, or 4 vessels, but then it became a radio schedule every night, and everybody would sit there and they'd catch up and they'd talk on the radio. And then suddenly, as the vessel numbers passed 20, those radio conversations would go on a long time, and it was a lot more labor intensive. And thankfully for technology, then email came into the mix, and so sites were booked and traded in the field via email. A couple of years ago, when we were doing assessments on the emails, the Secretariat became really involved because there was a lot of confusion. So we tried to centralize the email systems, and what we found was that there were, in some cases, over 150 emails a week going around. And for an EL, as you can imagine, you come back to the ship after a long day and there's 50 emails waiting in your box because the weather is crapped out down south below the Le Maire, and you've got to change your schedule and try to find a new site. So what we've really spent some time investing in over the last years is this live ship scheduler system, which is a good improvement. It's not perfect yet, but we're working on adapting it as much as we can to guides. And so in the field, this gives live change between sites. So a EL or whoever can release their site, and then they can book a site on the fly. They don't need to check their emails unless they want to. Technology comes with a price because there isn't necessarily as much human interaction. You don't just, as you're popping an email saying, hey, I'm releasing Half Moon, you don't say, hey, Alex, how you doing? It's really nice to see what you're doing over at Yankee Harbor. But it's made it a bit easier and a less cumbersome as far as the email goes. On the Derby Day, that's when all the operators log on at the exact same moment and try to book sites. And that was also another way that we changed the ship scheduler to make that flow a little bit easier on Derby Day, so that there wasn't quite as much stress behind it, but there's still, having been on the other side of the table, I've never been so anxious. I could have been in a Force 12 and I would have been less anxious than on a Derby Day trying to book the sites that you really actually want for the season. So those are some of the ways through the ship scheduler we're making improvements.
Yeah, great overview. Thanks for continuing to make improvements. I know it does help a lot for the ELs on the ground there, being able to have some flexibility and keep up the sense of adventure and take advantage of the best conditions and cater things to your guests. And Yeah, it's very helpful. So thank you for all the work. Speaking of technology, we have another question. This one's from Andy, and it goes back to site guidelines. And Andy's asking, are there any plans for IATO or any of the treaty parties to digitize the site guidelines? Meaning something like maybe that has maps that we can put into KML files or things that can be used with your GPSs.
Andy Wolf, nice to hear from you. Yeah, so that is in discussion of trying to make advancements in that way. We're not quite there yet, but I have a feeling it's not too far off. And the reason for that is some of the great work. So for the maps that are being used for site guidelines in a lot of cases, those are coming from MAGIC at the British Antarctic Survey. And they're making leaps and bounds in their imaging and their data processing and how those are converted and shared across stakeholders in the Antarctic. So we are working with the treaty parties. It's like anything, it's a slower process, but we have heard you, and we will definitely continue on with that.
It's great. It's a great answer. Thank you. Okay, how about the elephant in the room right now? So we're shut down due to COVID-19 and the pandemic. IATO is involved with helping with coordination between all of the operators and getting things up and running. Gina, are you able to speak to what's going on right now? What ideas are on the table? How is it working? How are things looking for the rest of this year and maybe towards the 21-22 season? What are we thinking?
So where are we right now? At this point, unfortunately, I think a lot of operators had to make a decision in relation to their season. And so I know this has impacted a lot of you. And, I'm going to step here and say people definitely were trying really hard over the last few months to try to figure out a way to make this work. There's been a lot of time spent amongst the operators to look at all the different techniques and technology that was coming out, whether it was creating safe corridors or cleaning processes, or, even just breaking down and figuring out how to serve a meal in a COVID situation. So there's been a tremendous amount of work, and there still continues to be that. Unfortunately, I think one of the biggest hurdles ultimately that everybody started to see was the fact that some of our gateway countries are continuing to have increases, and each country has to manage its own population and what's going on. And so, I think that ultimately led to certain decisions being made. And from our standpoint right now, our prayers and our thoughts are with those countries as well as the countries in the Northern Hemisphere, because I think we're all starting to see outbreaks throughout the world. It's definitely a challenging time right now. How does it look going forward? I'm going to say right now, I'm cautiously optimistic. You hear a lot of different things that are coming through. In the last week, we've had 2 different vaccines that have been talked about. Do I think that means that, those vaccines will be the thing that helps get us to where we need to be? I think that it'll help contribute to it. But I think people need to be a little realistic in terms of rollout and how things will occur, and it will take a little bit of time. It's been a long time, 100 years since the world has had to deal with a pandemic, and the speed at which I would say the world in general and science has responded to come up with these vaccines has been absolutely fantastic. But I think it's going to be a little bit of time before everyone can say we're back to 100%. But I'm cautiously optimistic. The other side that I will tell you is, and this has stuck with me throughout this whole thing, and I think I hit upon it a little bit when I talked about the way the operators work together, and it was actually all members working together to try to figure out a way around this. the drive and the desire of people in general to get out of this is pretty amazing. And there is such a huge focus on that, that I know something will happen. It's just going to be a timing thing and us having to be patient and realistic to what's going on. So, but I will say I'm with you guys. I can't wait to see you all back down there. I will be the first one. One of the operators used the phrase to me that everyone feels like they've been put in dry dock right now. And dry dock is not where any of us want to be.
Yeah, that's true, unfortunately. But you know, again, we're all in it together, and we can still be here, relating with each other and talking about the things we like to talk about, and thinking ahead towards the future. So thanks for all of the work that you all are putting into helping coordinate that for everybody. Let's get down to some nuts and bolts again. So we have more questions coming in through the chat from people. Some things more related to the guest experience and the guide experience here, rather than what the operators are up to. So I'll start here. This is a question from Alex, and I'll just read it. We've been talking for a little while now about the likely need for ships to start Zodiac cruising more, and maybe only doing one landing per day, because more and more ships are arriving on the peninsula. In respect to this, and also other issues related to environmental protection measures impacting typical operations, could or should IATO members engage in any coordinating messaging and marketing to manage guest expectations? There you go. So the wilderness experience is really what we're getting to here, and how can we continue to provide a good wilderness experience while allowing everybody to participate in shore landings as much as possible.
So, you know, I would say in relation to that, and it's an interesting question in terms of setting expectations, because I think as we move forward, in general, there's going to be a need to revisit things that we do and consider whether it's the impact on the environment or increase of numbers, you know, what's the best foot forward. I think there is an opportunity, and there are definitely things that we share on social media regarding different types of activities. And I think that probably is the biggest thing to make sure that we share with people, that there are so many different ways to experience and see Antarctica. And I know a lot of people focus on that land experience. But for me personally, one of the best ways I've actually enjoyed the environment is being out in the Zodiac or being out in kayaks, and really having that opportunity to engage with the natural world in a different way. Especially, I mean, you know, who doesn't love penguins porpoising around you as you're hanging out? So I would say that overall, there's probably more of an opportunity to increase it on social media, but I would also encourage the guides and the field staff to just talk about those positive experiences with the guests. There's a lot of excitement that comes out of the stories that you guys tell and the experiences that you share that can come forward. Lisa, I didn't know if there's anything on that to add from your perspective.
Just on the guidelines and what an Antarctic experience has, you know, what it should be or what it could be. IATO also in the last few years has created guidelines specifically for marketing teams to set those expectations ahead of time. I know that, you know, as guides, we all have felt that pressure from what was displayed in the brochure, or what's been displayed online, or what even happened on the previous voyage. So there has been some work also, including outreach to marketing teams, so they can understand the authentic experience that you all are giving. That doesn't necessarily need to involve 4 landings a day and 2 Zodiac cruises and a polar plunge. So we, you know, there is work, and it's continuing and it's evolving, and more operators are looking at it from that wilderness perspective, and to try to bring us back to, you know, that sense of wonderment for that perhaps can get lost, not necessarily all the time, but can get lost in the number of activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Lisa, I'm going to keep you on for a minute. We have a question from Kevin. That's in a way a follow-up to what you're talking about here. So here's what Kevin says. As a naturalist all my life, I have always picked up bits of dead animals to study them and the features. The guidelines are that we should not pick up dead animals. I can understand the need to do this in areas with a concern about disease outbreak, but for a routine landing, what about allowing staff to pick up specimens for educational purposes to show guests certain features like web feed, etc., but then to wipe their hands and use antiseptic lotion after handling them? What are your thoughts on that? What are IATO's thoughts on that?
Well, it's not down to IATO. It's down to the treaty parties and the guidelines and what they have put in place before. So yes, you're not supposed to pick up animals. You're certainly not supposed to take anything back to the vessel and share it at recap. Although I'm sure we all know stories and have heard stories of that happening. One of the areas where this has been, I say, negotiated, or you can find some medium ground, especially with a competent authority, is to talk about the educational experience and how that might be incorporated into a permit or an authorization. As many of you know, there's lots of different citizen science projects going on. There are a lot of different science projects that are even happening, not necessarily involving the guests, but that are transported on vessels. And sometimes it's those operators who actually are the ones who apply for the authorization to collect samples and bring them back. So whilst we can't encourage, of course, that any sort of taking or picking up, but what we would ask everybody to consider is ways around that, creative ways, and also engaging in discussion with competent authorities about that, because education is the hallmark of what operators are applying for. That educational experience is what creates the ambassadors, and that is really what this whole permitting and authorization process is based on.
So that makes me think that, so anybody that wants to go down to Antarctica on a vessel as part of a research group, whatever it might be, they have to get an authorization from a government entity. They don't have to actually become a member of IATO. And so IATO and the treaty parties have some guidelines, rules, and regulations in common, but there are other things that are unique to IATO. So what does that mean for us in terms of tourism? For those of us that are part of the IATO sort of ecosystem, how is the guest experience and the guide experience different from people that are just, say, on a some random super yacht from Montevideo?
Gina, do you want to answer? Or
Sure. I think for all of those experiences that people are going down there for, there are very specific permits and authorizations that need to be issued. And I think Lisa hit upon it before. Those, the competent authorities spend a lot of time with each one of those, and the vetting process, I would say, can be pretty intense for some of them in terms of them questioning what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. So, realizing that situation, it's not like you can just go down and say, I'm going to do this and be able to do it. There is some strict processes around there. We do have different operators that are bringing people down. Maybe it's a film crew, maybe it's part of a scientific expedition, and they may have a different experience compared to what maybe someone on a different ship is having. But again, all of that is going through that permit process for that very specific situation. So, yeah, at least I don't know if there's something else that we should be adding on that one, but.
no, I think.
I'm not sure, but how about this as a follow-up question? So we have these guidelines. They're the guidelines. They're not the laws. So there's a difference there. What happens if operators or guides don't follow the guidelines?
Well,
Well, we just don't talk about that.
oh, no.
We can talk
We
about
would
that.
like to talk about it. So I think we talked about it a little bit earlier about the fact that IATO, whatever is decided upon within the Antarctic Treaty System, IATO considers that binding. So it doesn't matter. Treaty parties, once something is accepted on the floor, for instance, measure 4, which deals with insurance, measure 15, which deals with the numbers on shore. Not all treaty parties have ratified that in their national legislation. So technically, if you were to be with a competent authority that didn't, within their permit or authorization, it's not binding. That specific measure would not be binding. However, IATO, we consider it binding. And so that's where we really, and the management of that IATO, does, it really goes above and beyond in a lot of places. And that's through the work of being proactive, of looking at ways that we can strengthen our own operations to be better. And sometimes the treaty parties are leading the way, and other times we're leading the way. But at the end of the day, it is a collaboration between the two. So within IATO, if a person were to go down and to be a bad actor, an IATO operator were to be a bad actor, and that would be reported, we do have a system within IATO called the Compliance Resolution Dispute System Committee, CDRC for short, that can look at those cases, and there's different ways that they look at it, different ways that they can respond to it, from a reprimand to a probation, and so that is one of the ways that we can have teeth internally for bad actors, and to make sure we're all working together at that high level, because it doesn't matter if it's a non-IATO operator or an IATO operator. If there's one bad actor, that tarnishes everybody. It has that knock-on effect. So we just all need to be really mindful of that, which is why it's fantastic for so many of the guides to feed into the process, to care about those guidelines that we put out there, to tell us problems, because that only makes us stronger as an organization, as an entity, and a stakeholder in Antarctica.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a follow-up question as well, ladies, whoever it's appropriate for. This is from Susan, and she asks, can you tell us about the Compliance Committee?
I'll do that. The Compliance Dispute Resolution Committee, it is a committee made up of members. And what happens is that the Secretariat will be informed of an instance or an issue that has happened. We will do an initial review of it. And if it is something that raises concern, we then bring it to the CDRC that Lisa mentioned. The CDRC will actually go through a review process. They will gather whatever evidence that they can. They'll talk to appropriate people to get information, and ultimately they'll come back and they'll make a recommendation regarding whatever action may have occurred. During that process, it's not a process taken lightly. It is very serious. Before we even begin going through it, we actually also just check with all the CDRC members to see if anyone needs to recuse themselves. Sometimes there are different relationships. But ultimately, once they've gone through their process, they will then provide a recommendation to the executive committee, who then reviews it. And then ultimately it goes to the members for a vote regarding the action that occurred and the determination as to whether or not there needs to be any corrective action. But the process, I've been learning a lot about CDRC and the process since I've joined. And it's something that the members take it very seriously. They realize and Lisa said it, and I've said it, that they realize that if someone does something, it impacts everybody. Really, the web is so connected down there, and we rely on each other so much that if somebody's doing something inappropriate, we need to address it as soon as possible. And that's the purpose of CDRC. So I hope that has given Susan some additional information on that, and it hits the points.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that. Compliance, here we are. Let's talk about something, maybe again, we'll bring it back over to the guides themselves. We have the field staff assessment program, right? So each year the ELs and the guides, we get assessed online according to our knowledge. That's a process I really like. I enjoy it. It's great. It's a great refresher, but I always appreciate it. It gets me excited to go down there and start thinking about these places that I'm happy to go back to year after year. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about the program. So how much of this is really changing every year? Maybe speak to the overall importance of this, like the messaging that's coming out of these assessments. Yeah.
You might be in the minority of people who enjoyed taking it.
I'm trying to throw you a bone here, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you very much. The emails don't always that we get response to it aren't always.
And Colby, just so that you know, I'm expected to feel the pain as well. Mm-hmm. So it's on my list to occur this summer. I will take the assessment myself. So
yeah. So the online assessment, it is an important part. If you and you may go to this later, but if you take the standards, the field staff standards that IATO and NACO are speaking about, let's consider that this is almost the first standard that was set within IATO. And the reason why it's important is because it's one of the tools that we show the treaty nations that the officers, the crew, the field staff, observers, and even office staff are qualified and continually training and learning the most up-to-date information. The amount that it changes during a year really depends on the decisions that are made, not only within IATO, but within the Antarctic Treaty System and also South Georgia. Because we know South Georgia is also included. So when new information comes out, new questions are created each year and then put into the pool of over 3,500 online assessment questions, which to shout out to Aaron, who vets each and every one of those questions every year to make sure that the information is accurate and based against the documents that we have in the FOM and elsewhere. So that's the basis. It started with field staff, but now it's become actually more important because we've expanded that to officers and crew. The treaty parties, they're watching us. They're watching how they know that growth is on the horizon. They know that we're going to need X many more staff. We're going to need X many more crew and officers. And some of those may not have the same experience as others. And so we need to be able to show that we're beginning to help increase their education or fortify it, and it's really fantastic. We've had a really wonderful uptake on, especially for crew and officers, and the feedback has been great from them as well, because before, perhaps, you pull a ship up, you drop the anchor, maybe captain would go ashore and wander amongst the penguins and come back, but maybe they didn't understand all the nuances that go in with the decisions, and why they were doing things a certain way. And we've had some great feedback from the captains and crew telling us about the new information that they've learned while taking that assessment. So we know it can be tedious. I take it every year as well, regardless, and the ops team, poor folks, I make them take it every year as well. But it's really important for us as well to be able to increase our knowledge and to be up to date. So that's why even within the Secretariat, it's important. Gina, you have something else?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, I think it's very powerful. I know I've heard different feedback about it, and I could appreciate why people, feel and will say some of the things they say, but at the same time, from my perspective, it's really important because I think, Colby, you hit this well, it resets your mind in terms of where you're going and the importance of that environment and helping just remember and focus as to why you're there, what's going on, and what the challenges can be. Interestingly, and hopefully Haley will not be upset for me for letting this out of the bag, but we had one of our members suggest that we do something for Antarctic ambassadors and do something for the guests. So we're actually looking in terms of creating an assessment light for them to kind of help prepare them as they either prepare for their voyage or on the Drake Passage, getting them in that mindset of how special this environment is and why we're doing some of the things we're doing. More on that in the next year. But yeah, we're excited about it.
It's interesting to hear, on a personal level, I have to say, I really appreciate that because with, going to a place, traveling anywhere in the world really, but especially a place like Antarctica because it is so pristine, it comes with great responsibility. And I think we could take that seriously. And, if we have to sit down for, a half an hour and study and another half an hour to take the test to make sure that we remember all the things we're supposed to remember, I think we owe that to ourselves and to everybody as guides. Yeah.
Colby, if it's only taking you a half an hour to study and a half an hour to take it, it's not hard enough.
Nah, I didn't say that. Those are your words.
Not meant to be difficult. It's just meant to educate. That's the key.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good refresher. Yeah. Well, all right, let's move on. Lisa, you sort of dropped a little bomb in there. I'm not sure everybody knows that that IATO and IAATO are working right now towards developing field staff standards, and this would be for guides and really any field staff. Of course, it's not just a clever name. So there's been a committee. They've been working for quite a while jointly now. There is some information, some standards that have come that that IAATO has already accepted in their AGM. Where is IATO right now with that process?
Yeah, I just had I had a really great conversation yesterday. It was yesterday, the days fly by, with IAATO about this. So IATO operators and which can be joint IAATO operators or even operators who only operate in the Antarctic have been involved in this process. There have been some workshops which came out with this initial round of guidelines which were accepted at the IAATO AGM as they aren't mandatory. They're a work in progress, let's say. So for many who are working in the Arctic, there are Arctic nations and Norway in particular who is looking to impose guidelines regardless of whether or not IAATO creates them. So it was necessary that they started this process a little bit faster than IAATO, but we are committed between the two organizations now of moving forward together in this process and making sure that it's aligned, because what we don't want to get into is this this back and forth. IAATO has their AGM in October. They change the guidelines a little bit. Then we roll around to our AGM in May and we change the guidelines a bit. So our hope moving forward, and we'll be drafting some terms of reference over the next month or so about this planned progress. Is that we work together. Perhaps there's some workshops. It will, for IATO, we'll have to go through our committees and go through our members before anything is adopted. But we're committed between the two organizations to being on the same page at the same time, so that everything moves forward smoothly and there's no confusion for the guides as well and the operators who are expecting their guides to meet these standards.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate that you all are working together for consistency. And then as far as the standards themselves, you know, I've seen a preliminary copy, but there's 8 different things in there, right? So what are the guides ultimately going to be responsible for at the onset of this?
Well, really, it's going to be at the operators. So you'll have those standards, and those standards will be standards that each operator has to meet for their guides. How they do that is really up to each operator. We know that operators, some of them have really extensive guide schools within their organizations. And we know others use outside assessors as well. And so it will be up to each operator to be able to demonstrate that their field staff have met those standards. But those will be minimum. So if people want to go above and beyond, that's absolutely wonderful. But those will be the minimum standards. And those right now, they're very, very basic, right? They're the small boat driving, polar bear safety for the Arctic, first aid. But in time, perhaps those will become more expansive as to what they cover, no doubt.
Great, thank you. Of course, PTGA, we're all about standards, so we like to see that. We're on board with it for sure. Let's see, we're winding down. Let me switch over here to our viewer questions and make sure we're getting to everybody. So all right, I have 2 questions for you here. One's from Gerard. He says, we see more and more yachts down in Antarctica. Realistically, we have little opportunity to approach them and to promote IATO membership. What more can we do? As somebody that works on yachts, I should say that a lot of the yachts are IATO members and that there's a whole yacht committee within IATO. Maybe that's a good place to start.
Gina, would you like to?
Yeah. And I think, Colby, you hit upon it well. A lot of the yachts are members of IATO. We do, to your point, we do have the yacht committee. The yacht community as a whole, I would say, is very close in terms of talking to each other about what's going on and knowing what's happening. The yachts, our yacht membership has increased over the years. And I think it's because they see the value in being part of the organization and what it brings, because they realize that being part of IATO and working with the larger ships, they're able to also work through different issues, whether it's site in terms of who's visiting when, as well as just, if assistance is needed at any point in time. So I think they've really realized that there is that value, and the community has become very close. From my perspective, in working with everyone the last 8 months, I don't think anyone looks at it and says, well, you have a yacht and you have a big ship. We're all members together. Let's work on this together. So I think that's the positive of this. I don't think there are many yachts that are down there that are not members. There might be the odd one every now and then, but at least I think they're pretty inclusive nowadays with the membership.
We do. I think that's probably the non-IATO yachts in the past years has been probably the biggest concerns, not only within IATO but also within the treaty parties, because right now we're seeing between 9 and let's say 11 unauthorized yachts who are coming down to the peninsula, which means they haven't had that education process or that we know of anyway. So we see a lot of times, unfortunately, that those tend to be the bad actors, and those are the ones that were the yachts, the IATO yachts or the permitted non-IATO yachts who have been working really, really hard to stay within the treaty guidelines. And then everybody just kind of makes a generalization, unfortunately, that all yachts are doing this. So the yacht committee itself is really, they're trying to do some education and outreach, particularly in those gateway ports, you know, Punta Arenas, Puerto Williams, Ushuaia, Montevideo, to really reach the yachts that might be going south, that even with a permit may not have all the information. And we really want to, with the yacht committee, encourage ELs to, you know, to reach out. We've given all of the vessels on that lanyard with the different flash drives, the education and outreach flash drive, which has all of the publicly available treaty information and also IATO information, to share that with them. But also to be able to, you know, just say hello. Before the season was rudely derailed, we did, in speaking with the yacht committee, we were going to put together, you know, a list of IATO yachts, so that IATO operators of the larger vessels would know exactly who, you know, who are the IATO operators, who, you know, and who might they feel more comfortable knocking on the hull and saying, hello, you know, want to have a cuppa, you know, or do you need anything? So we're looking to improve those relations between yachts and bigger ships, whether it's non-IATO or IATO yachts, as we move forward. And it's a great thanks again to the yacht committee for that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the perspective. Here's a good one from Ted. Ted says, tell us about the most exciting thing happening at IATO today.
Wow, there's actually, it's been interesting because I know people, we've hit upon the fact that there isn't a season, but there's actually a lot that we're doing this year, and taking this opportunity from a pause standpoint to move forward with a lot of different things. The most exciting thing, the thing that I'm particularly excited about at the moment, is we're getting ready to launch our 30th anniversary campaign. That is coming out in the next 2 months. We've started it with even like a little coloring campaign, encouraging people to help us design our new patch. I think, Colby, we were talking about patches before this session started. So if people want to make their mark, I encourage people to get involved. So I'm really excited about what's being developed there, because it really takes a step back and looks at everything that's been accomplished during the last 30 years. It kind of helps remind us as to where we've come from and how far we've come. But then it starts to look towards the future. And I would say that's the other side in terms of what's going on right now that's exciting, is, you know, just we are looking towards the future. We're taking this as an opportunity to reassess things and what's going on. We're spending some time looking at the Secretariat itself to just figure out how to fortify it and make sure we're in a better position as we come out of this to help continue to support the members. But we're also looking at different things from an investment standpoint. We've been focusing, Lisa talked about Ship Scheduler before, that's something we continue to do, as well as a lot of what we're doing in science right now, and focusing on that. Something that happened last year, which is probably one of our big successes, is we revisited the infrastructure of the Secretariat, and we separated the roles between communications and environmental. And by doing that, we've been able to really focus more on both of those disciplines. Communications, Haley's leading everything for the 30th anniversary. On environmental, Amanda's really taken the opportunity to drive certain things forward. Lisa was starting to talk before about the relationship with SCAR on the systematic conservation planning work that we're working with them on, to really look at what we're doing. And so all of that gets me very excited, because it's looking towards the future, which right now I know can be a hard thing to do, because we're all trying to manage everything from a pandemic and the way it's kind of affected our lives. But looking to the future definitely gives me hope. And it's pretty exciting to see right now.
Great. Okay, one final question here, and we'll get to other viewer questions. So this one's from Alejandro, and the question is, in addition to technical standards, can you also train social skills? For instance, to generate links with passengers and to reinforce the Antarctic Ambassador Program? Are there any plans to train social skills?
Well, I think one of the things that we work with and talked about, the relationship with IAATO, we do have the Polar Staff Field Conference. And I think some of the soft skills have been looked at or talked about in the past at some of those sessions. But it's something that we could probably look into further and to see what other opportunities may be on that. But for Antarctic ambassadors, we are going to be sharing more information in relation to that. We're looking really to build out that structure a little bit more. I didn't even get a chance to mention our new website. I don't know if you guys have realized IATO has a new website. It's completely different from the website we'd had for a very long time. And one of the exciting things is there's a specific landing page for Antarctic ambassadors. And so we're going to be putting more material together and things to share with all of you to help make that connection more with the guests and to build ambassadorship further. So that is on the list to happen, Colby and Alejandro. Yeah, no, thank you for mentioning that.
Hopefully it's just as easy to find the field staff assessment on the new website as well. Well, ladies, thank you very much for taking the time today. Maybe we'll conclude here with Gina. Did you want to say a couple closing remarks or anything else worth mentioning that we haven't got to yet?
Yeah, Colby, I'm going to kind of touch upon what you were talking about in the beginning. And for me, that really resonated in terms of reaching out to one another. I encourage you guys to do that. Colby's point about that is so important right now. And I would almost encourage you to kind of look at your contacts and try to make it something you do where you pick up the phone and reach out to somebody different once a week. Because right now I totally appreciate we're all feeling isolated. I'm feeling it myself. If I didn't have my dog, I'd probably be going a little nuts. My dog and Zoom calls keep me going these days, so I can appreciate how everyone's feeling. So I just encourage you all to figure out a way to make that connection, especially as we get into some of the later months. So, but thank you for that beginning on that, Colby, because that was spot on in terms of how important it is for us all to stay connected right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that's true. We could all be here for each other. Lisa, was there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off today?
No, it's been great, and although I can't see everyone out there, it really again it's great to speak with everybody and to hear the questions and the engagement that continues, and we are IATO, and we'll come back stronger and better.
Good to know. Thanks for being here to support us. Thanks for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And everybody out there, thank you for joining. And a reminder that these series are ongoing. Next week, we're going to be with Ian Johnson, and he's going to talk about making a difference on purpose. So incorporating ideas of stewardship, conservation, and that sort of thing into your interpretation when you're out there in the field. So thank you all for being here. Lauren Farmer, of course, has been behind the scenes on all these. A big thank you to Lauren for keeping everything going here today and connecting us all together. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.